Hello and welcome everybody to, according to Andrew, number 111, Depopulation in Exchange for Political Privilege. So, it's not the best title, maybe, but I'll get into it and hopefully it'll all make sense. On the cover we have the French in the Seven Years' War and King Louis XVI. Some of you might be wondering what these people have to do with what I just explained, or is it the 17th? I think it was the 16th that ended. No, it had to be the 17th because Louis XV was, yeah. So anyway, the one that died in the revolution. Um, but what does it have to do with that? So I was reading this book, Rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, which is great so far. Not too difficult to read or anything like that. You're not getting lost easily. Pretty easy. Well written, basically, is what I'm trying to say. I haven't gotten too far, but I made an observation, and instead of what I usually do, which is wait until this entire book is done and then talk to you guys all about those observations in one giant podcast, this seemed like a big enough topic to cover a whole podcast, and adding a podcast inside of a podcast when you're doing a book review makes them very, very long. So I'm going to try to avoid doing that in the future. But what an interesting thing that occurred or popped up within this is obviously French society had stagnated by this point, and so it was very interesting to see what kind of happened there and what's happening here, and we can kind of see what's going on. So there's a great quote in here from General Comte Saint-Germain, who strongly condemned the distinction between court and provincial nobility, between rich and the poor. The former at once comes out by the senior grades as it is right, the latter by the sole misfortune of birth and poverty, and is condemned to stagnate in its junior grades. This practice is doubly pernicious. The first group does not have to work in order to succeed. The second does not work because it is useless. Thus, all ambition is destroyed, but without ambition, man is nothing and can only vegetate. And that kind of rung very true with me, with all of the stuff that we've kind of seen over the last coming years, where if you're not politically privileged, you can't get hired for a job. It doesn't matter if you're competent or not. None of that stuff matters anymore. The only thing that truly matters is whether or not you're seen as favored within the political establishment. Now, that has its upsides and it has its downsides. And I think one of those downsides is the price for that political privilege, that price for power is a depopulation. So what's going on right now, if you're not familiar with church and cycles of history, I'll do a quick review. I've covered it on other books. Look at my reviews and I'll link them up in the top corner of his cyclic cycles of history and stuff like that. Ages of the reviews are of Ages of Discord. I think I talk about it in, and Secular Cycles. The other one that it probably touches on it is he had Historical Dynamics. So those are his three books that he's written on the topic. I definitely recommend all three of those books. Historical Dynamics gives the greatest range of theories within it, and the other two are more case studies of the secular cycle theory and the kaleidodynamic theory, something like that. Anyway, the idea goes, you have a basically new. The short of it that you've probably heard is strongman or clogs going up the stairs, or wooden shoes going up the stairs, silk slippers coming down. The other adage is strong men make good times make soft men make hard times, and then hard times make strong men. Those are the quick and dirty adages of it. The longer form of it is basically when a society starts out, there's enough political positions for the current crop of elite. Over time, as populations grow and stuff like that, that crop of elite grows. That crop of elite then has to compete for what generally what happens is the elite population growth outgrows the amount of positions within the political structure. And so, to kind of compensate for that, it eventually causes issues. So basically, as the elite class grows, the pie in which they get to take from in terms of taxes and stuff like that doesn't grow as fast. So then taxes get raised, which then puts more pressure on the lower classes. They're making less money and stuff like that. Usually leads to economic stagnation. So then more of those people are looking to push their way into the privileged class or the politically connected class. As that happens, the slice of the pie gets chopped up even more on the top, which then puts more pressure on the bottom. And this cycle just kind of continues until eventually there is no other option for politically ambitious besides overthrowing the current regime and replacing it with a new one. I'll let you take your guess as to where we think we are in that process, but I'm thinking we're towards the splintering part. What that ends up looking like, we'll see. One of those splinter groups could be considered the Trump thing. Maybe he isn't. Maybe he is. Maybe he's one of the first ones. Maybe he's not. Generally, it takes a couple cracks at it. You could maybe even argue some of the early attempts at this were people like Pat Buchanan and stuff like that. But that's kind of the setup. And to just kind of get back to the French situation and how bad it got in France, the main place that they ended up expanding their political privilege was within the army. So in 1775, the king named 7 new marshals whose qualifications were virtually nil, a fact not lost on cynical French public, which categorized them on the basis of the 7 deadly sins. In 1776, the kingdom supported 535 general officers, of whom 20 were marshals. To put this in context, I believe Napoleon, who literally was fighting wars for like 20 straight years, might have had 20 marshals. Maybe. Actually, who is it? Something History TV has like a whole thing on Napoleon's marshals and goes through each one of them and ranks them all. It's a great thing if you're interested in that. Definitely go check that out. 167 lieutenant generals, 364 brigadier generals, and no fewer than 1,500 general staff officers. And this is actually something that is argued by Bill Lind, that we have too many, in our military, there are too many upper echelon generals and not enough non-commissioned officers or maybe commissioned officers. Basically, your guys in the field that are getting stuff done. And there's too many people kind of that in positions that make them feel important, but really they just push papers and don't really do much. In 1789, the roster would number 966 brigadier generals and 1,918 general staff officers, which worked out for one officer for 75 men and one general for 157 men in the army. The highest ranking officers, princes of the blood, received 60,000 livres. Basically, it cost the state a crap ton of money to keep them all employed and doing absolutely nothing. But this is something that we kind of see today in the HR departments and other aspects. And so we can kind of see that this expanse comes at a cost. So French army and society at large was gridlocked by political favoritism. Court standing was far more important skill set than the skill for the given task, thus destroying all motivation to move up. Due to since you aren't royalty, there is no opportunity. And we kind of see that a similar thing kind of playing out today. It's not as bad, but, well, I don't know if it's not as bad, but this is echoed in wokeism today. If you're a straight white male, you are not allowed to advance, thus why try? The main problem with both circumstances is that advancement was based on immutable characteristics. That leaves no option for you to play the game. So what I mean by that is there's certain things where maybe you're really good. This is something that gammas fall into all the time. Well, they're really smart, and so they want women to be attracted to the fact that they're really smart. Well, guess what? Women aren't attracted to that. So you can either hope that women change, which isn't going to happen, or you can change how you play the game so that you can actually start winning. And it's the same thing with like, you're on a basketball court and you're mad that they're not playing football. Well, it's like, dude, you're playing basketball. Like, understand the rules of the game, play the game. And then, if it changes over to football, now you got maybe skill sets to be able to play both. But when it's something of like, are you, were you born into a royal family? Yes or no? Okay, well, I didn't really have a choice in that, right? Were you born, one of the seen as the disadvantaged groups or whatever? Yes or no? Well, no. But don't worry, you're not going to want to be a part of that group because it comes at a pretty high cost. We'll get to that. This leaves no option to play the game of courtly appeal versus competence, for example. There is technically a choice with wokeism due to the trans movement. For most, it isn't worth it. I would say it. I'm surprised anyone's taking this deal, but it's technically an option. But for those that are willing to chop their cock off, you can gain great favor within the court and therefore have a way to get around the circumstances of your birth. So if you really, really wanted political power, this is an option. But this is part of what I talked about. Depopulation is the price for power. You can't, if you want power nowadays, you aren't allowed to reproduce. That's why liberals are given power because they basically have 0 kids. That's why gays are given power because their power will be passed to someone else by the next generation because they can't have kids. Anyone that can secure power for generations to come by having lots of kids isn't allowed to get power because they are a direct threat to the political power system that exists. And there's too many elites already. We'll get to that. I don't recommend playing this game in terms of the trans thing. And based on the reaction of society at large, they don't really have an interest in playing it either, but technically it is an option. As always, it comes down to the core issue of having too many politically privileged people, but not enough positions within societal structure for all those people. I think a large factor of limited government is a limited elite class in terms of limited amount of population. If you have barely enough elites to fill all the halls of the Senate, then you certainly aren't going to start an alphabet soup agencies that you can't staff. As the elite population grows, the need to find jobs for all these elite increases, and so the alphabet soup agencies are developed. Then, after you run out of that, they develop into woke HRs. In the last days of the French monarchy, as we discussed, they were funneled into the army, and that's why there were so many generals and stuff like that. As long as there is a place to funnel aspirant elites and children of elites, you generally won't have splinter factions develop. It seems that this game has come to an end in our time in the United States right now, as the Leviathan of government has pervaded just about as many corners of society as it possibly can. Technically, we can go full socialist and go a little bit farther, but it's the distance between like hitting its hard ceiling and like kind of what we can pull back from is there's a lot less room there versus other spots. What it really comes down to is the elite population needs to be reduced by an extraordinary amount. I'm not saying that it's going to happen or what should be done, or I'm not saying do any violence or whatever, but it's just something to consider that the elite population needs to go down, which might explain why there's been such of this depopulation push all of the sudden, and it seems kind of weird, but then you think about like who's being affected, and it seems like the people that are supposedly on the side of the depopulationists, but in reality they're kind of not. So right now, with the victimhood Olympics, generally what is how it's working out is you have to sacrifice your lineage in exchange for political power. Gays basically are self-sabotage out of political power because they can't have children. Liberals don't really have a lot of kids. Liberals are the most likely to get the jabba jabba ding dong. So, and college educated liberals are the least likely to have a lot of kids. So all that's going against them. And so this is one of the reasons they're allowed to basically have power is because they know that if they're given power, they're not going to basically outstrip the amount. They're basically running out of positions already, so they need to kind of shrink the size of it, of the amount of elite and privileged positions within society. And to do that, basically they're like, look, if you want political power and stuff like that, the exchange, and it's not like, this isn't really like discussed, it's just kind of how it's playing out, is, hey, if you want political power, you have to give up your ability to continue on your lineage. So then moving on to more theoretical basis for stuff, for all those people who are always talk about small government and wanting to have small government and stuff like that, I don't think they realize if this theory holds true, whether or not, what the cost of that is. So let's see here. So as an example, if you want a small government, then you probably need about 90% of your elite and elite aspirants need to die or be somehow forced out. They pretty much have to die. I'm not going to really mince words about that. Because if they're just forced out, then they have a chance to come back and create a splinter faction that's going to cause a civil war, which is, you're probably going to have a lot of those if you want a small government. They need to die every generation to not put pressure on the expanding roles, put pressure to expand roles within government for those pursuing power. Either that, or you need to accept near constant civil wars, which effectively does the same thing. Now, if we look at why the United States government stayed small for so long, the reason the U.S. managed to keep a small government is because of manifest destiny and the near constant conquest of the continent, and therefore increasing the elite positions opened up as new states were founded. Once that stopped, the government began to grow because they needed places to put those people. And as I talk about this more, this might have been Turchin's thesis. I don't actually remember. Sometimes you have that issue where you read stuff so much that it all kind of becomes a blur in your head, and you're not sure if you read that somewhere or if you came up with the idea on your own. Additionally, to this point about America, I wonder if that was the driving force between the British Empire. Colonial governorships allowed elites to hold positions of power when none were available within the UK Parliament, thus giving a pressure relief valve for elite competition. In this way, the depopulationists might be right when they're talking about elites and elite aspirants when they're looking, when they're saying that there's too high of a population. We assume that they mean in the world, and generally about how they've been talking, that seems to be the case. But there is a small chance that they actually just mean the elite. There's like basically too many people. There's too many chiefs, not enough Indians, kind of thing. And so they're looking to scale the amount of chiefs back within society so that society can be run better. Thus, maybe the low birth rate of 2.5 children is correct for the elite, or basically the politically privileged, the people running society, while a higher birth rate of 7 is better suited for the commoner class. And children are wealth, so like, don't sacrifice having a bunch of kids just because you want to be considered don't want to be considered a commoner or whatever. This is the kind of things that you have to sacrifice and for power and stuff like that. So it's for anyone that's has ambitions to rule the world and stuff like that, which, considering some of my people that I looked up to are, you know, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Napoleon. I kind of fall into that camp. I gotta imagine there's a lot of guys who are like, dude, could I like do it? Could I like be one of these guys? Um, anyway, so one other aspect of this is uh, the style of war could give insight into which form of overpopulation the elite suspect. If there are too many subjects to manage for the given elite, then a meat grinder type war that kills off masses of the commoner class is what develops your World War Ones. There's, by the way, this last point is just kind of me throwing stuff at the wall. I don't really have anything that necessarily does this, and it kills off a lot of most wars kill off a ton of the commoner class, but World War One and World War Two were especially that way, and I believe the 30 Years' War had a lot of civilian type death. Whereas you compare it to other wars, a lot of the wars in the 1700s and stuff like that, a lot of that was professional armies. And while there were a lot of normal type men that would die in those wars, a lot of those guys were basically ex-criminals that they forced into the army out of jail, and they're like, you're gonna fight, or you can either get shot now or you can maybe survive on the battlefield. And they're like, shot later sounds good to me. But the people that were running all those armies were generally the first one. The first son gets the inheritance. The second son goes into the army, and the third son goes into the church. Was generally how old aristocracies ran their families when they had a lot of kids. So that meant the second son was probably the most likely to die. And they had a lot of disease back then, so maybe that wasn't necessarily the case. But yeah, so that if you need the elite killed off, you would have a civil war type scenario, or you would potentially have a professional army type situation, which I just described, fighting each other with high officer fatalities. If you look at the German World War II Wehrmacht, that would be a good example of you trying to kill off a lot of your potential elite aspired type stuff, because the way they ran that military put a lot of your very important commissioned officers and non-commissioned officers, your lieutenants, your sergeants, the guys that are on the front lines with the soldiers and stuff like that, in very dangerous positions, and a lot of times got them killed. And that led to officer turnover that they couldn't afford to have, even though it made their army very, very effective at at the third generation of warfare that they were operating at. We're not going to get into the third generation warfare. You can look that up later. Look up Lind if you want to know about that. I don't think the elites have much control of this, or are even consciously making these decisions. I think this is just kind of something, various pressures within society that make this play out. Maybe if they are controlled by demons, the demons have a master plan that they're trying to work out. Even that, it's a crude tool at best. So this last point, definitely just kind of take it with a grain of salt. But that's kind of my thoughts on that. And I thought maybe that would be kind of interesting. If you did find it interesting, please like, share, subscribe. It's always appreciated. We're on BitChute. We're on YouTube. We're on Podbean and all the other podcasts that you can get. Your Apple Podcasts, your Google Podcasts, stuff like that. Because I'm terrible at marketing, BitChute and YouTube are under Upchuck McDuck. The Podbean and the Apple Podcasts and stuff like that are all under According to Andrew. The easiest way to tell is the duck logo is on all of them. So that is the one consistent thing I have. Hopefully also, I'm not sure if I'm too high or anything like that in terms of the volume. I don't want to be peaking or anything like that. So let me know if it's too high or too low. It is greatly appreciated. Trying to get that just right for everybody can be a challenge. Anyway, thank you guys for listening, and hopefully you guys have a good day. Goodbye.